Hello, thanks for joining us. I am Alex, the Adult Services Librarian at the Penn Yan Public Library, and we are very pleased today to have a talk from Hanna Martens, who is the chair of the Penn Yan Beekeepers Association. Did I get that right? Penn Yan Beekeepers Association? Okay. Which has been meeting at the library in normal times regularly, once a month, to talk about all things bees and pollinators, offer each other tips and tricks and knowledge on how to care for pollinators and your beehives and things. So we're really excited that she will be here with us now to share some of that information with us. So I will turn it over to you, Hanna. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about honeybees and native pollinators. So as Alex said, I'm the chair of the beekeepers in our area. That was basically handed down to me. So I'm just there to facilitate meetings, make sure we get together once in a while when times are normal. And we talk about everything that includes our beehives, and then we wander off into other pollinators and exciting stuff that's happening. So I thought I'd share a little bit about first honeybees, because that's what I like to talk about best, and then a little bit about native pollinators here in New York State. So the honeybee is Apis mellifera. It is native to Africa, and it was brought to North America in the 1600s. It lives in colonies with one fertile queen, and it spread naturally to Europe and the Middle East in the beginning. There's 28 recognized subspecies that were that adapted to their habitats, and it was one of the first domesticated insects. And it's very important to us because it is one of the major pollinators. I'm just seeing, I think my presentation might be going ahead of me sometimes, so I might have to go back. So this is a picture of inside a hive. This is a frame of a beehive. There's big boxes that you've probably seen before. They're nearly square, and they have certain amounts of frames per box. They can be deep boxes or shallow boxes. Here you can see a frame with the larvae. So the queen lays eggs, and as I said, there's one queen. And if it's a fertilized egg, it becomes a female worker. And if it's unfertilized, it becomes a drone, a male bee. And the male bee, they're only there in summers, and they're only there to fertilize queens of different hives. Bees undergo metamorphosis, and the workers do everything from nursing the brood to foraging, which is the ones that you see around, cleaning out the hive, and they live for about a month and a half in the summer. In winter, they live longer, but and there can be 10,000 to 80,000 workers in one hive. So there's a big range of how big the hive can be. So why do we keep bees? One big one is pollination. Then there's use for wax. Of course, honey, which is one of the reasons I'm keeping bees, because we go through so much honey, and I was like, we can do this ourselves. Pollen and propolis. Propolis is the resin-like, and it's the sticky stuff that the bees use to glue everything inside their hive together. There's other reasons. You can sell bees, and of course for the fun of it. So what do bees actually forage on? One of the first things in the spring is a good sign that the bee year is starting, are dandelions. So if you see dandelions in the spring, you can be like, hey, spring's actually here now. They love wildflowers. Everything basically that blooms and that flower, where the flower is big enough that they can land on it and take the nectar from them. And of course, egg crops like apples, rapeseed, clover, and cherries, among others. So if we didn't have bees, we wouldn't have those pollinated. Here's another picture of a frame. And here you can see the pollen. So while they are out collecting, they collect nectar to make honey and pollen, which they use for brood rearing. They mix the pollen with some of the nectar, and that is called bee bread, and they feed it to their young. And you can see here, this is a really nice and golden into red pollen, and it can be any color really, depending on the flower. One other thing I wanted to share with you guys is that in like spring to like midsummer, it is pretty possible that you can see swarms. So swarms happen when a beehive feels like they're crowded in their basically in their home, and the queen decides it's time to take off. So she and the worker bees decide it's time to make new queen cells, and the old queen, once the new queens are ready to hatch, the old queen leaves the hive with a whole bunch of her workers, and they fly out and try to find a new home. Sometimes they land in trees, they land in poles, they are in cities. You've probably heard one or the other story about it. And here you can see this is like a ball of bees. And this is basically how you procreate beehives. So beekeepers love these swarms if they are close to the ground, because they can just collect them and they have a new hive. And I actually had a wild hive move into one of my empty beehives. So I have some of them close to my house, and I had one move in, and I wanted to show you the video quick. You can see that there's lots of bees flying around. So while they are all together in a ball, sometimes, most of the times they're not, and they're just flying all over the place. So when they came flying in, they were like, hey, this is great. We're gonna move in here. And it was just great. I mean, this is free bees, and usually their genetics are really good. And they're really hardy because they've overwintered somewhere else in the wild. Now I'd like to move on to pollinators. So just generally, pollinators move pollen grains between two flowers of the same species. If the pollination is successful, we get healthy fruit and fertile seeds. 90% of flowering plants rely on pollination. And there's around 200,000 species of pollinators, of which 1,000 are hummingbirds, bats, and small mammals like mice. And the rest are all insects: beetles, bees, ants, flies, wasps, butterflies, and moths. Native pollinators. So native, of course, means everything that comes from a certain area. So New York State is home to more than 450 wild pollinator species. They're important for crops as well as biodiversity and ecosystem health. I go into that a little bit later. And 1/3 of food is directly pollinated by those 450 species around here. Yeah, and here's a list of things that are pollinated by pollinators in general. There's lots of flowers that honeybees cannot get into, but their flies are important, and beetles, and all those other things like moths. So for example, almonds, you've probably heard about when there are, a lot of times people truck their bees to California into the almond orchards, and they sell the honey, and they get good money for the pollination, because otherwise there just wouldn't be any almonds. Things that we would grow here locally would be like pumpkins and squash and watermelons, soybeans, and for example, grapes. Well, grapes are like a mixture. Usually they're wind pollinated, but they also can be cross-pollinated by animals. So I really like this graph of the importance of pollinators. You see here there's that the future flies with pollinators, which is completely correct. Although a pollinator does not necessarily have to fly. To pollinate, as long as it gets to the flower, it's fine. So I want to talk about a few of these points on this slide. You can see all of the like different pollinators. They're not all native to here. Like we don't necessarily have bats that are pollinators. Those are usually in tropical areas where they're actually pollinating plants. So yeah, one thing I want to talk about is biodiversity support. So by improving biodiversity, so that they are facilitating the reproduction of native and diverse plant species. So we have an ecosystem, and there are just many more plants that can survive by pollination, because then they produce seeds that are fertile and they can reproduce. This is also important for keeping a resilient ecosystem, so one that can bounce back if something bad happens. One other thing would be the raw material production, which, for example, would be directly produce things like cotton, vegetable oils like canola, or like even like pumpkin seed oils, herbs, and medicines. Then there is, let's see, resources for wildlife. So resources for wildlife is because they're not only pollinating fruit, which some wildlife would eat, but they're also serving as food, because, well, it's a cycle of life. By helping the different plants stay in the area, they're helping soil erosion, because if there's more plants, they have more root mass and there's less possibility for erosion. They're helping the nutrient cycle, as I said, with this whole cycle of life. Important ones here would be carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and oxygen. And let's see what else we have here. Recreation. I mean, we like to see all of the flowers, so we like it when there's lots of plants. I, for one, go out and not necessarily look at the plants themselves, but also at the pollinators. And by having the plants, you also have better water filtration. So there's lots of reasons why we need pollinators besides the only producing the seed. So here I want to talk about a few of the local pollinators that we see here. The first one is the ruby-throated hummingbird. So I haven't been in the area all that long, so I'm not sure if I've ever seen a hummingbird, but I know they're around. And so the ruby-throated hummingbird is a migratory bird. They can be found from Canada down to the tropical regions, like around Mexico, Central America, Panama Canal. And they feast on wildflowers a lot. So they have this really long beak that can reach into the flower itself to sip out all of the nice nectar. They also eat spiders and small insects. And they can be found in forests and near rivers. They especially eat the trumpet honeysuckle, the red columbine, lemon bee balm, and wild bergamot. One fun fact that I saw is that they actually, before they start their migration, they double their weight. So they double their weight to 6 grams, which is still super light, but they usually are only about 3.4 grams, so half of that. The next one I want to talk about is the Eastern Tiger Swallowtail. As you see, it's a butterfly. Their habitat is very diverse, which makes it easy for them to find resources. They live in woodlands and creeks, well, not in creeks, but along creeks, along roadsides and garden and fields. They are very important to the flame azalea, especially in the Appalachian Mountains, because they are one of the few pollinators that can pollinate them because of their large wingspan. So the anther and the stigma, the male and female parts of the flower, are so far apart that only something with a big wingspan can actually, so when they eat on it and they move across, they can actually still touch the outsides of the different part. Now I want to talk about the milkweed quick. So milkweed is a flowering plant that's very common around here. And it's also very important, and you've probably heard about it, for monarchs. As you see in the picture here, there's a monarch. So for the monarch, it's the only food that its caterpillar can eat. So if there's no milkweed, the monarch can't breed here. It's also great for honeybees. They love it. Native bees, hummingbirds, and butterflies. So this would be one of the pollinator crazy attractions. I myself am not allowed to plant it because it is still considered a weed in agriculture, but if I see it, I'd usually leave it in my garden. Don't tell my husband, please. So now I want to talk about some problems quick, because while having native pollinators is great, they are facing quite a few problems. For example, so if you go back to the managed hives, managed colonies of honeybees, there's been a greater than 50% loss over the last couple of years every winter. And it is suspected that the natives are even greater, so that their loss is even greater. Some of the problems are pathogens and parasites that have been introduced, pesticides, nutrient deficiencies, and habitat loss. So for example, if there's no more milkweed for the monarch, they just can't live here. Or if everything's sprayed down, all of the ditches are mowed, stuff like that. And climate change, which has a lot of different facets here. It can go from a drought to floods to a change in flora, so change in flowering plants, change in fauna. For example, a different predator moves into the area. Or the migration patterns of a predator change, a late frost, or a spring that's too early, so they can't really survive yet. Or if like a late frost event, there's so many things that are problems. And of course, invasive species that take the place of the actual, so that take the niche over. So solutions. New York State actually has a pollinator protection plan. In that they talk about IPM, integrated pest management, which is farmers working together with scientists and looking at their field and deciding if they really, really need to spray at this point, or if they can, or if the pest pressure isn't that strong, that they can just push it off for a week or skip it altogether. Land management, like mowing, destruction of forests or wetlands, stuff like that. Research. There's always new research going on, trying to figure out how to help native pollinators survive different changes. And of course, a regulation in pesticides, which is not only the frequency of spraying something, but also the prohibition of certain things like neonicotinoids, which you've probably heard about. So they are really, really bad for bees in particular. But I mean, in those, it has been studied really well, and in native pollinators. Here, for example, you can see in the picture, this is a syrphid fly. So it kind of looks like a bee, but it's not. There's a lot of animals that do this. They look like one, but they're actually not. It's just a protection for them. So, solutions. Of course, this is from my point of view, and there's so many things we can do. So we can increase the diversity in our gardens, plant lots of different flowering plants, also some have trees around, maybe plant a wildflower patch, or just leave an area to just grow up a little bit, of course, not in like total disarray, but in like certain, for example, in like certain plants. For example, in the back here at our house, I have a big patch of goldenrod, which my husband wanted to mow, but I'm like, hey, this is what my bees eat right now. Don't mow this, please. He wasn't really happy with that, but hey, it's for my bees. Don't use chemicals. I know that this can be hard sometimes. There's certain things like fertilizers also, but especially on your lawn. I feel I've never used anything on our lawn. We have a lot of clover in there that the bees feast on. And I mean, if you want something to look like a golf course, of course that you would need to spray, but if not, try not to use anything. Educate yourself and others. That's one of the important things, to be aware of what impact an action can have. Also, know what you're dealing with when you look at a pollinator. There is a lot of times when someone talks to me or I come into a situation, they're like, oh, there's a bee there, or there's like a bee's nest. And I go over and I'm like, well, that's not a bee. So I'm also not a fan of wasps, but they do have their place in the food chain. So they are useful for some things. Of course, I also don't want them right in my living area. But it's important, I think, to know what you're actually looking at. And that helps you to understand what their place is. And also coming back to like the like an area in your garden, sometimes during winter, try not to disturb all of like the brush and things, because sometimes they are like pollinators are overwintering in the died down shrubs or in your pile of wood, or in like the tall grass that's kind of still standing. Yeah. And they unfortunately cannot look at a sign like this and say, hey, they sprayed there, I'm just gonna stay out of here. So we have to help them a little bit, because they are helping us a lot with food. And of course, support your local beekeepers and farmers. Buy local honey, look what your farmers around you are doing. Maybe even tell them, hey, how about you don't spray this? Or so what we are doing, so we have an organic farm as well. So I'm not as concerned about it, because our bees are all on organic land, which doesn't mean that they produce organic honey, because they have such a big range. So they fly over a 3-mile radius and collect everything they can. But if they would be standing on a property where there's like a direct spray next to it, that would be concerning. So always keep an open dialogue, and but never tell anyone what to do, because people don't like that. I wouldn't like it either. I want to give you a quick overview of what a pollinator garden could look like. You can find pollinator mixes all over the place, like in every garden store. Some of the things that pollinators really like and are in a lot of the mixes are, for example, dill, borage, basil, hyssop, calendula, milkweed, as I said, coneflowers, zinnias, bachelor's button, asters, sunflowers, sage, clover. They really like clover. They do go under like the medium red clover. They really like the Dutch white because of like the bigger flowers, and bee balm. And a lot of these flowers are really, really pretty. So you're not just doing it for them, but also for your own visual pleasure. Native plants are really important, so make sure that the mix is right for your area, so that you don't introduce like a species that you don't want there. Another thing that you could do to help pollinators, especially like this year I put out a bird bath, and my bees loved it. There were all kinds of pollinators, and but sometimes they also attract different animals. So my cat also liked my bird bath. I just thought I'd share this because you attract all kinds of things when you put out help, so to say. So for the water, because it was really dry. And if you plant a flower patch, you'll probably also find in the wilder areas of your yard, like other animals moving in, like rabbits or something like that. So if you want more information, I'd like to direct you to Cersei's Society. They're everything invertebrate, like insects. The Pollinator Partnership, the USDA website, Cornell, for example, the Pollinator Network, and Corporate Extension. They have lots of information online. And yeah, this basically concludes my talk. And I'd like to say thank you for watching. And if you have any questions, reach out to me, or yeah, just comment on anything, and I'm sure we can figure something out. Here's like mostly the sources for my pictures, because most of the stuff is just, it's in my head by this time.
Very cool. Thank you so much. And yes, I will be posting this on the library's YouTube page, and I'll probably cross-post it over to Facebook. So if there are anybody out there with questions, post them, and I will make sure they get back to Hanna, and we can get back to you. But thank you so much. I was especially pleased that you included all of those potential solutions, because one thing that weighs on me is the loss of pollinators. And so knowing that there's some things that us regular folks can do to help is really encouraging. I've always wanted a little wildflower patch, so I'm going to work on that.
Yeah, I've been planning one for so long, and I'm always saying, well, next spring. But now I have my goldenrod patch in the back, which is basically the same thing.
And I will not tell any organic farmers out there who are trying to mow down your goldenrod patches or anything. You know, speaking for myself and also for the library, you know, we support pollinators. We love our pollinators, and, you know, because we love vegetables and fruits. So any opportunities we have to work together in the future, you know, we'll continue hopefully to have meetings when the library opens back up for meetings. Yep. The public is welcome to join you for those, right? When those do come back? Absolutely. Everyone's welcome at those meetings. We generally meet the second Saturday a month at 10 a.m. Righto. All right. Well, we will make sure when things do get a little bit back to normal and that, you know, happens in person again, we'll make sure to let people know. And yeah, I just want to thank you very much. That was really interesting. Thanks for having me. All righty. Goodbye, everybody.